Hi, and welcome to VIBEZ Daily. This is a daily devotional curated by VIBEZ Church to help you practice the way of Jesus and be all that God has called you to be. You have joined us for our year-long series titled Devoted. Acts 2:42 tells us that the followers of Jesus were devoted to the apostles' teaching, to fellowship, to breaking of bread, and to prayer. This podcast was created to provide context and commentary for what you read each day. Just before our friends begin discussing today's reading, we want to invite you not only for fellowship, but for prayer as well. We have created the VIBE Daily Chat Group to offer you fellowship and a community where you can state your observations, ask questions about the reading or the podcast. You can join us by downloading the VIBEZ Church app in your favorite app store. Click Join the Conversation and join us today. And finally, we hope that you can join us for prayer. Prayer happens Monday through Friday, and more information on that can be found on the VIBEZ Church app under prayer. Now, let's begin our conversation on today's reading.
All right, welcome to day 8 of the Devoted Reading series. I am back with my friends Collin, Shameeka, and Victoria. So excited to do another week of reading with you. Man, just before we get into actually this week's discussion, I asked you guys a Bible question last week, Bible reading question. I want to ask you one more this week. What is your favorite Bible translation to read?
So my favorite translation is the New Revised Standard Version.
Okay.
Ever since I graduated seminary, it was probably the most in-depth version to read. And my professors used to tell me that that's the most accurate translation from the Hebrew.
Okay.
And so I grew up on the KJV version, but I was able to understand the Bible a lot more when I read the New Revised Standard Version. But the version I'm reading now is the NIV because that just helps me put it in plainer text.
Yeah. Gotcha. Okay, that's fair. Good.
So yeah, I'm a NIV girl all day, but recently, I think thanks to my husband, I've grown to appreciate the NLT version, and then also I have Christian Standard Bible as well. So I interchange, between those three versions.
Okay, so NIV, New International Version, NLT, New Living Translation. All right. Did you say New Revised Standard? Or you just said NRSV. You said New Revised.
Yeah,
Standard.
New Revised Standard Version.
Make sure we, all these acronyms. We'll make
I
sure
know.
we get it right.
I was like, that's the first. I haven't heard of that one.
Yeah.
Mine would be the Christian Standard Bible, the CSB. That's my favorite, except for understanding, kind of like Collin, it's my understanding Bible. But today I have the ESV version, the English Standard Version. So yeah, I go back and forth. I have a parallel Bible, so those three help together.
Cool. Yeah, it probably also depends on what year and what I'm doing, but I have been a Christian Standard Bible reader of late. It's been kind of my favorite translation myself. So yeah. All right, cool. Let's jump in. We are in chapters 18, 19, 20, and 21 today on day 8 of reading. And so where we left off last week at the end is Abram had just become Abraham, right? We just kind of got to that point. So now we're going to get a lot more of Abraham's story here today. And so here at the beginning of 18, Abraham has this very interesting encounter, this very interesting meeting. And yeah, it's just a little different and unexpected is the way that it was kind of responded to. But anything that has jumped out to you in the way that Abraham responded to these visitors, these people that came to see him? And I mean, you don't necessarily have to stop just at that beginning piece, but even through kind of some of what was shared and how Sarah responded, anything that just jumped out to you here in the beginning of chapter 18?
Yeah, for sure. I was going to say immediately, just the respect and honor that Abraham had for these men. I'm he probably haven't ever seen these men before, don't know who they are, but the fact that there was just this honor towards them, hold on, let me make sure I make sure they're good. I prepare some stuff for them, all that stuff. I just thought that off the bat, that was something that I noticed. And I was like, well, why did he do that? And in the text prior, it said that the Lord had appeared to Abraham. So maybe he had associated those men with the Lord sending them and kind of anticipated, okay, something is up. Let me go ahead and prepare, and just, be hospitable to these 3 men or these guests. So yeah, that's what I noticed right away.
Yeah.
Yeah. To Shameeka's point, I think along with the idea of honor, there's a sense of urgency that when he sees that these men have arrived, he sets the table for them and gets food for them. And even his interaction with Sarai, he's telling her, you know, I need you to get this food ready quickly.
Yes. Yeah.
And she does as well. And I think that sometimes, like with our encounters with God, we kind of take our own time.
Yeah.
But Abram doesn't. He understands the importance of this moment. And so he regards it as holy. And so he deems it necessary to go fast and be urgent with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what stuck out to me was just how quickly he did things. He ran, he bowed, he went quickly. And I'm just thinking he's old. Abram's old.
Right.
Does it say that he ran and he like was quickly doing all these things?
Yeah.
And he's a man of like status and stature. Like he doesn't have to be the one. Like he has hundreds of people in his household. Like he could have very well just been like, hey, you go do this and hey, you go do that. But even that he took it upon himself to do some of these things and that he was himself running around trying to prepare, it kind of just set this stage of like humility and like this honor and respect, which we'll get to later, but like it's just completely different than Lot. Lot, like he was a little slow to like get out the city and they're like, come on. But that's in the next chapters, but I loved it.
Yeah, it's this beautiful picture of him just preparing a place, right, for the Lord and his servants to reside, right? Like these three men are sent on behalf of God, and we see them. I mean, they're here for a little bit in this story, but it's just like they felt this urgency, as you mentioned, just to prepare a place. Yeah. And I do think that like even as applicable to our lives, like in the way that we approach worship and we approach prayer, like it ought to have a similar sense of just urgency and preparation, and really just like, God, I'm not just gonna lift a hand and I'll give you a little bit of a during worship, but like I'm gonna really prepare my heart. I'm gonna prepare this place, this space for you to reside in me, with me, like here. And I love that. And then to you guys' point, I mean, and to bring everybody else with me, like we all like this house is prepared for you, right? It's not just me, and it's not just me doing it, but Sarah quickly get to it, servants quickly do it. Like this house is prepared for you to reside. And I just thought that was a beautiful picture of that.
Yeah.
And I think also too, from verse 16 all the way to verse 33, it's the first symbol we have of prayer. Like Abraham is praying to God about saving the people in Sodom and Gomorrah. Yeah. And one of the interesting things that I find is that in verse 26, he says, if I find 50 righteous people in the city, that I will spare the whole place for their sake. And Abraham knows that there are not 50 righteous people in Sodom and Gomorrah, but he doesn't stop praying. He goes all the way down to 10 people, which we talked about before, it being the number of testing. And I think that sometimes, like when we pray to God, we'll stop at the 50 and say, okay, God, I guess it's not going to happen. But it's like we have to continually go to the Father and ask and plead for his help, and then he will respond.
Yeah. I love that whole conversation is so I think just encouraging for me, because I love that Abraham had the rapport and the relationship with God. Yeah. Right. To be able to go back and forth like that. Right. And again, he still had the honor, right? He kept saying like, Lord, if you would allow me to speak, right? Like he knew he still needed God's permission to come back and forth. There was this honor and this reverence, but he also had enough rapport to say, I know that I can ask one more. Like I can still ask you again, and I can, keep continuing to go back and forth. And I think, again, it just encourages me that like God can handle my back and forth with him. Like he can handle what I got to say. And again, there's reverence and there's honor due, but that he can deal with this back and forth. And then just to see that, that grace that God showed, despite that, because he kept extending it. He said, all right, I'll go for 45 and I'll go for 40, and ultimately down to 10. But it's funny, I thought what you were gonna say, Collin, was that like I love that God says he will spare the whole place for the sake of those few. And I do wonder like how often the the faithful have protected the unrighteous, essentially, right? Like that for the sake of the righteous, God has withheld.
Yeah.
And said, like, I won't destroy a place because I have servants that are here, people that love me that are there, that I won't do it. And so even if you think about your home, right? Maybe you have a wayward family member or something of that nature that like you've been praying for, and God is like, I'll spare them for your sake, right? Like I won't destroy them yet because you're still praying for them and you're still living right. You're still doing that. And I was really encouraged to hear that, because it's like, he could have said, well, sorry, you're outnumbered. I'm taking the whole place down.
Yeah.
But he's like, for the sake of those few, I'll withhold. And I'll spare them. And that whole conversation, man, just was mind blowing to me.
Yeah. That reminds me of like the scripture that talks about the prayers of the righteous, how they prevail much.
Yeah.
And like, I'm even reminded of Job. Like Job would pray and like repent for his family on their behalf, and like how God honored that. So I think that is something that was really cool that did stick out. And we probably all know by now, since we did talk a little bit about Lot last time, how like Abraham really wanted God to spare Lot in his family. Like he was like, hold up now, like I know Lot is over there, and you know I don't want anything to happen to him or our family. So I believe that he was like vouching for Lot for sure in that situation. So but yeah, I was gonna say though, before even this part, like I just couldn't skip out on acknowledging like God saying that he's going to fulfill that promise of giving them Abraham and Sarah for a son. Yeah. With Isaac finally kind of popping up on the scene, and he literally said there was a appointed time, like by this time next year when I come back and see you, like you will have a son. And this has been something that has been desired for so long. Like they've waited for so long, and from Sarah's response, you could tell that she had kind of given up hope. Like she was just like, I'm old now. Like this ain't nothing that's about to happen. Like people gonna laugh at me. She laughed herself. She's just like, what do I look like at my age having a son? Yeah. But like still God promised to Abraham and like to his family of like these nations that he would have. And he's like, okay, I'm being a little bit more specific by letting you know that next year it is so. Yeah. So yeah, I thought that was cool.
Yeah, I love how her laugh versus his laugh in the previous chapter. Like I feel like he laughed before at God, but he bowed and laughed, right? Yeah. And there was still this reverence to like, God, I'm laughing at like, this sounds ridiculous, but I trust you. Like it sounds ridiculous, but if you say so, like, am I honoring? And I think his actions followed up with that, because we spoke about it last week that like his obedience, quickly doing what God asked him to do, was followed by even this chuckle that he gave. But for, like you mentioned, Shameeka, for Sarah, she laughed out of disbelief. And I just think that like it's just very interesting to see like even just her transition from disbelief to like belief once it happens. I'm sure things so much have changed in her life. Like God can really do the impossible. Like this is crazy. Like her laugh once Isaac got there was probably more so like a, wow, God, like I can't believe you did this.
Yeah. I wonder if she still doubted all the way up until Isaac actually got there. Right. Like something's still gonna happen. I'm still 90 something having a baby. Like anything can happen between the now, like conception and ultimately at birth. And so I feel like you're right. It's about the time the baby was actually born. She was like, oh, okay, he was for real.
And one more thing I'll say about verses 16 and 33, Eric, I love how you said how it shows how close Abraham and God had gotten. And people want the proximity to God that Abraham has in Genesis 18, but they don't understand that it took 6 chapters for him to build that relationship. So it takes time for you to build that relationship with God. When you see people at church having this access and all these prophetic works happening, they don't understand the private moments that they've had. And it really takes time to build that relationship before you can go to the Lord and ask things like this.
Time and test, right? That's the word you keep kind of bringing back to us. Like, I mean, at this point, and we'll see it a little bit later, but like God has tested Abraham time and time again. And I mean, from, hey, will you leave your people? Okay, cool. All right. Now will you go again, or will you do circumcision? Will you do this? Right. We kind of get to some of these other things, but like time and time again, he tests him. And you said it's over time and it's over test that he gets to this intimacy, this level of intimacy with God. And you're right. I think many of us do. We want it immediately, but it takes time.
Yeah. I also wanted to point out how, like, it talks about the Lord, like, heard the outcry of the people in Sodom and Gomorrah, and, like, how he was just so grieved by the wickedness. And I just thought that was just reminded of, even with Noah and before the flood and stuff, like how, like, this sin and this wickedness that was within these people, like how, like, God is still a God that is just, and he's still ultimately, like, he wants to be the one that is, like, glorified and, like, you know, the feared. And so the fact that we're going to transition to the whole story of Sodom and Gomorrah, where God's like, there's still consequences that needs to happen for the wickedness that is happening within, you know, these cities and nations and these, you know, these areas. Like, you know, God still wants that reverence. So, yeah, although he isn't going to do it the way he did before with the flood, like, we still see him being that just God that we talked about in the previous chapters.
And I love that you said that, because even right before that, the Lord was just like, should I hold this from Abraham? Like, should I keep this from him?
Right.
Or should I let him in? Because he could have just wiped the city out and given no opportunity for Abraham to pray for them at all. And I just love that he said, the relationship that Abraham had that you guys were speaking of was that one that, like, God invited Abraham into this decision-making process where, like, he revealed something to Abraham, knowing Abraham's heart, and then Abraham was able to pray for Lot and then for Lot to be able to be saved. Like, because the Lord didn't have to let him know about it. Right. And I think that's a challenge for me, is like, when the Lord reveals something to us, like, sometimes it's just to pray, right? Like, to pray for that person or pray for that situation. It's not just the Lord can show me. Like, it's really, like, our prayer can change things. It can change people. It can save things. It can save people. And so I think sometimes I kind of glossed over this, but it's kind of like, God, you didn't have to. Like, you don't have to tell us anything that you're doing.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. That's so good.
It's good. Yeah, I mean, I think it's good to transition to 19, right? Because God previews what's going to happen. Let's just talk about what actually happens in chapter 19. So Sodom and Gomorrah are destroyed. And that's essentially what we get. There's the whole story of these angels going to Sodom and Gomorrah, and Lot invites them in. So we kind of get that story. What happens? Where they confirm, right? Because that was one of the things that it said in 18 verse 21, back to Shameeka's point about that outcry. Like, he said, I will go down and see if what they have done justifies the cry that has come up to me. If not, I will find out, right? Like, I'm going down to just double check and confirm that they are as wicked as everybody says they are. So, and they find that out pretty quickly in chapter 19. But what jumps out to you guys in the story of Sodom and Gomorrah and how it's destroyed, or how it comes about, and just looking at pretty much all of 19, what jumps out to you guys about this?
I'm like, this is where the Bible becomes a soap opera. It gets juicy. Man, so much things stuck out. One, I do love, I know we talk about a lot and we're just like rolling our eyes like, ugh, this man, but I do love that he at least had respect for the angels that came. And he was like, you know, just welcoming them into his home and, like, even protecting them. But I mean, the biggest thing that stuck out was you really do off the gate see the sin that happens and that takes place. Like, you have literally all the men all over, you know, Sodom, like, at Lot's house trying to have sex with these angels, knowing that they're men. And so you see the homosexuality in them, like, willing to tear his door down to get to them. And I'm just like, man, like, I just imagine them being out there with, like, these, like, pitchforks with, like, fire burning, like, let us in, just kind of like this whole riot situation. But yeah, like, it's like, it was just wild really seeing that whole encounter, but also seeing Lot being willing to give up his 2 virgin daughters. Yeah, that was heartbreaking. In replace of the angels. I'm just like, why was that an option for you?
Yeah.
Could you not have just said no? Like, period. But so yeah, off the bat, that was something that stuck out, and I wasn't sure if that was any correlation to how we talked about like the sons of gods and how there were Nephilim that were there at a certain point in time, where I was like, maybe it was normal for them to see these encounters between angels and humans because of the fallen angels that were there before that were having sex with their daughters and stuff. But either way, it just was wild.
Yeah, it stuck out to me that it was both young and old. It said all to the last man in my version. It said to the last. I'm like, every man. Nobody stood back. Like young and old. It just blew my mind.
Yeah, I guess it shows the generations of wickedness too.
Yeah, that it wasn't going to stop.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like the similarities of chapter 18 and chapter 19. How the angels arrive, and both Abraham and Lot are urgent to take care of them.
Yeah.
And I think it shows the power of submission, because like we said, from Genesis 12 to this point, Lot had been with Abraham. And what we see is that Lot just wasn't along for the ride, that he was learning from Abraham in these moments. And it ultimately was the thing that saved him, because Abraham wasn't there to instruct him in that moment. So there had to be a period when Lot was with Abraham to help him to understand, how do you treat guests? And how do you deal with the Lord? And ultimately we see that despite Lot being away from Abraham in this moment, he still remembers the instructions from Abraham.
Yeah.
To be the only man left in the city not trying to tear down doors and sleep with them, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Right.
Yeah.
as if every other man was trying, and Lot was the one exception then. Like,
Yeah.
that's really good, Collin.
It's good. It's a good call out. Yeah, I mean, I think obviously the place was deprived. I mean, it was a mess, kind of all that was happening. But there obviously, again, this is another example of tension between mercy and justice, right? And God, that the justice was Sodom and Gomorrah had to be destroyed, but the mercy is like, Lot, give me everybody that you got, son-in-laws, daughters, anybody else, like, let's get them out of here. And to ask that, and so, they give Lot that opportunity to go. Now, obviously, one of the things that always is so difficult, and it's interesting because it's like one verse, verse 26. It's just this one verse that's kind of slid in this story, but it says, "But Lot's wife looked back and became a pillar of salt." And then in the midst of all of this kind of back and forth, and it just keeps going from there. Like, it really doesn't say anything else about his wife. There's obviously this challenge of just really, again, just always like looking backwards in our lives. Like, I think it's one of the things that of late I've really been struggling with in text, is just really trying to figure out, like, if God ever wants us to look backwards, right? Like, I think he's always determined and motivated for us to look forward and move forward in life, right? And that the past it's behind us, it is what it is, but God, he always wants us moving forward and looking forward. Now for her, obviously, it was extremely consequential, right, for her to look back. But I think for us, it often is too. Like, how often have we, maybe not have turned to a pillar of salt, but we've doubted God because we look back, right? Or we've had mental health challenges because we look back, or we have anxiety, or we long for things that we've had and don't have anymore, right? And it's caused issues and trouble. And so, again, maybe it's not a pillar of salt, but there are so many consequences to just looking back and longing for the things that we had before, when God's like, I'm trying to do a new thing, and I'm trying to take you somewhere else. So like I said, it's just one verse, and it just kind of skips over. It keeps moving. They don't even say, I mean, obviously she's a pillar of salt, so you probably don't need a barrier, but like, they don't even like mention her again. And I just thought that was so interesting.
Yeah. And so I love the point you made about Lot's wife looking back. And when I think about her looking back, was she looking back on what was or what could have been? Because we see in the verses before that these men are treating people badly. And I don't think that this was their first time doing that. And how many times do we look back on our past knowing that it was trash, but we idolize it because we think we could have had something special?
So,
that's so good.
That's so real.
I can go so many places with that. Shameeka, I think you were about to say something too, though.
I was gonna say, like, I had wrote in my notes, I was like, Lot's family was way too comfortable in that city and with that wickedness. Like, even just seeing how they drug their feet to get out, and even how, like, what was supposed to be the son-in-laws that was going to marry his daughters, like, they thought he was joking. They ended up staying and dying as a result of, like, just being comfortable in this environment. And, like, to your point, like, what I've identified in my own life, like, with me looking back, it was because there was a level of comfort that I had there, that, like, when you step out into a new place or the unknown, like, you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know, like, what's going to be there. It is this starting over that scares us and that, you know, we're often fearful of. And so I can see that comfort being that piece of, like, looking back at, you know, what was or what could have been, because it was a familiar place.
Yeah, that's good.
And then that hesitancy, right? Like you said, that hesitancy to go where God's telling you to go. Like, the angels literally told him, go to the hills. Yeah. And he was like, no, I want to go to the city over here, though. And then when he gets there, he's scared of the people and ends up in the hills. It's like, if only we were just obedient the first time. Right. And just go where God told you to go. But you said you're comfortable where you are, and where God's trying to take you, you're not always sure about it. It just doesn't always seem like that's the right thing to do, or the right place, or the right plan.
Right.
Yeah. I wonder, just even as you mentioned this, like, looking at the difference between Lot's response and kind of Abraham, and we again get some other tests by Abraham later. Like, I'm curious if this is, like, why Lot could have never fulfilled the promise. Like, why Lot could have never been the heir. Because like, God just knew there was a different level. Like, he wasn't as faithful. And that had to come from Abraham's lineage, right? That faithfulness had to come from him. Like, I wonder if this was like, because you look at the responses, he's just different, man, from choosing the good land to, you know, being in Sodom and Gomorrah to, again, not being with, like, he's different than Abraham. As much as there were some similarities, like, he was a different person. And I wonder if God was just like, yeah, I can't work with him. I need someone that comes from your lineage. But so obviously, again, so they eventually leave, as Victoria's alluded to. Takes them a little bit, but they do. And so as they leave, as he's in the mountains, there's this piece at the end that's a little curious, right? And kind of the response of his two daughters. Anything that just jumped out to you guys about this? I know it's a very interesting and curious passage. Anything about the way that his daughters tried to continue Lot's line that was interesting to you guys?
Yeah, I thought that they were a direct result from Sodom and Gomorrah. Like, this is what y'all lived around and learned. Like, this was an acceptable idea. And both of them were like, And it also just seemed, like you said, short-sighted in that you'll see Abraham asking the Lord for, you know, offspring and stuff. And then here, you know, well, even she took it into his own hands at some point. But here it was just like, I wonder how old they were. Because I'm like, if you weren't that old, maybe the Lord would have had time to bring somebody around, or you guys were going to migrate somewhere else. Right. Like, I wasn't sure what the urgency was to make this happen right now.
Yeah, same. Because, like, in their mind, they just couldn't foresee, like, there being a new land with more people. It was as if, like, the flood had happened and everyone on earth was destroyed by how they were acting and responding. And I know that they were pretty much engaged to be married. Like, so they were almost there. So maybe that's where some of that was, where it was like, dang, like, we literally was about to be married, and, you know, they probably envisioned their husbands coming along, but now they're like, we got to take matters into our own hands. In the way that they did it, like, to get Lot drunk. And I'm like, how drunk do you have to be to not know that, like, you're having sex with your daughters? Because there's no one else there but you and your daughters. And your wife has died as a result of looking back. But, Yeah, and I think this is a great period of unknown, because even jumping back to verse 27 and 28, I think we kind of miss how depressing this verse is, because Abraham, he gets up and goes to the exact same place that he prayed. Right. And the Lord promises that he would spare the 10 righteous people. And then he's looking down at the sulfur and fire. And so he's thinking that Lot is in this storm. And so
Lot is not, I mean, Abraham is not sure if Lot is still alive, and he has to keep on living his life. But then we see in Lot's interaction when he's leaving for Zoar, the Lord is not just destroying Sodom and Gomorrah, but he's also overthrowing these cities and destroying all of the plains. And so I wonder if Lot is in the same way wondering if Abraham is still alive. And so that desperation that you're talking about with Lot and his daughters is kind of synonymous to the flood. We don't know who's alive. We don't know what's next. So I think I have to do everything in my will in order to restore the lineage in the world.
Yeah. I would say one of the things that just jumps out to me about it is, the sons, right, that come from this Ben-Ami and Moab, who ultimately are their descendants become the Moabites and Ammonites. And if you've ever read any of Old Testament and every time the Israelites is at war, they're at war with the Amalekites, the Moabites, the Ammonites, the Philistines. Like these are like those people that they're always at war with. And so I just think it's so interesting that again, just birthed out of this sin becomes like the enemy of God and his people, right? Like literally born from this becomes the people that will be at the opposition of God's people for generations. And so I just thought that message interesting to me, just seeing those names and knowing that this is where it started, right? So when I read later that there's the Moabites and there's the Ammonites and there's this, they're like, man, that's because of Lot and his daughters, right? That these people are here. Anything else from 19? Just I don't want to move too quickly. But if not, obviously we have chapter 20 as well. And so we have Sarah, and this is a very similar story, right? We've heard something just like this happen before. But Abraham goes somewhere. He says a very similar story about who Sarah is to him. Yeah. And ultimately the king. Anything that jumped out to you guys from chapter 20? It's a little shorter chapter here, but anything that jumped out to you guys?
I just wondered why he kept leaving. I was like, why are we moving again? I just feel like the Lord just kept showing up, near the oaks at Mamre, and he keeps showing up to you, and I don't know where you're going. But like I said, I don't have all the context. But again, he said it's the giving up of Sarah to save himself. Yeah, it seems like. But I also wrote down that like he had went here before in chapter 13 and God didn't answer him here, and so I thought it was interesting that he came back around this area. Yeah. But I think also my last thought. I know I'm like moving through it, but I'm so glad that it did say specifically in verse 4 that Abimelech had not approached her, and my thoughts was like maybe God was like protecting the seed, right, of Isaac. Like it was possible that either she might have already been pregnant and just didn't know it because no modern technology, right? Or that if he did sleep with her and got pregnant because he was opening her womb, like now it's Abimelech's seed and not Abraham's, or like it could have been messed up because like now she has been declared that she was about to have a son. And so I think the Lord was definitely protecting her womb and her egg and all of that by making sure that he did not sleep with her this time.
I thought it was funny that you actually said that because it talks about as a result of like the whole lie with Sarah being like, his sister, Abraham's sister and stuff, how basically the Lord like closed the women's wombs around Abimelech, so his wife, and like they were not having children. And I thought like to that point that was God's protection over like Sarah's heart, because like had maybe she seen like these women being fruitful and having children, and of course this was a struggle of hers, like she probably would have went down that road again of like, all right, let me see what I can kind of do to make this blessing come quicker or whatever. And so but I also noticed that this was the second time that the Lord did something to the king or the person as a result of this lie. So the first time there was like he had inflicted diseases on them because of the lie, and I was just like, like this is a big deal to the Lord, obviously, that like he cares about Sarah, he's protecting her, but he's also causing harm on these people that innocently don't really know that, like, you know, they're lying about not being married. But I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, for sure.
I think this also speaks to God's providence, because like the assumption would be that just because God has called Abraham, that he's only with Abraham. But we see throughout this chapter that God is speaking to Abimelech more than Abraham.
Yeah.
And so I love how Abram, he's scared because he says, there is surely no fear of God in this place.
Right.
Yeah.
When in fact there actually was.
Exactly.
And I think the application to today is that sometimes in the church we assume that God is only there, but it's like, no, in the places that we don't expect, God rests right there as well.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
That's good, Doc. That's real. Yeah. I thought it was silly, his half truth, right? Like, you know, he calls out, well, you know, really she is my sister because she's, you know, she's a daughter of my mother, or whatever the case may be, or the daughter of my father. And I think that it tickles me, because it's like you withheld a specific truth to avoid, you know, what you thought would be persecution or whatever the case may be. And it's just this idea again, man, a half truth is still a lie. Like, and I just, it was intentionally deceitful. Like, it was intentionally avoiding and withholding information for it. But I thought it was funny to hear his justification and just think to ourselves, like, how often we justify, you know, withholding something or how we approached it. Like, we just get enough of the truth in it, and we think we're solid. But that whole little piece was just really funny to me, that he tried to give that excuse and answer to Abimelech.
Yeah. I actually also appreciate Abimelech's plea to the Lord, like where he was like, hold on now, like, spare my life because I didn't touch her. Like, you know, had I known that this was a situation, like, I would have never even like taken her in, kind of thing. And so I think that showed a level of boldness from him to be like, you know, to be comfortable enough, like how Abraham had the conversation about, you know, saving the righteous people in Sodom and Gomorrah, for Abimelech to be like, hold on, like, spare me, like, please, like, I'm not trying to, like, you know, cross you in any way. So I appreciated seeing that encounter with them. And also, I feel like this was the first time I heard God speak to Abraham, like, literally call Abraham a prophet. And I'm like, how cool is it that we see God identify a gift that I don't think I had picked up on or saw previous or prior to, you know, in the scriptures when it came to Abraham.
Yeah, I just love how, even though Abraham was at fault and he was sinning again and had his own plan, that God still used him. Like, still called him as, I'm like, this is he's a prophet. Let him pray for you. Like, again, he's using Abraham to pray for someone. I thought it was beautiful. Like, because sometimes I feel like when I mess up, I'm like, oh, I'm not worthy of the calling, Lord. And I just kind of like shrink back. But I think it just also shows that, like, how graceful and how merciful he is. Or how gracious and merciful he is.
Yeah.
That's real. Yeah, so Abimelech's not quite done. We'll talk to him again in 21. But just to kind of wrap up today's conversation, we do get to chapter 21. And man, after days of this and years for him, chapters for us, Isaac is here. Anything that just jumped out to you guys about the birth of Isaac and maybe some of the fallout from that kind of happens here at the beginning of chapter 21?
I think it was interesting that Sarah, of course, was the one who was like, "No, you and your slave woman. Listen, get your son and leave, please. Like, send them out." I think it's really interesting that the Lord affirmed Sarah. I feel like I've never really seen him the affirming side of, like, yeah, do what she says, but he really was just like, just do what your wife says. That's fine. Because my plan is through Isaac.
Yeah.
Like, and it seems like, but it seems like God's pushing them to the side. But as we know that he was the God who sees Hagar and he met her in the wilderness, we know that like he's already had a promise in line for Ishmael. He's already has an eye out for Hagar and he's going to be protecting them. So it's kind of like, yeah, send him away from you guys, but I'll still be taking care of them.
Yeah.
So everything will be all right.
Yeah. I thought it definitely gave Abraham an opportunity to trust the Lord, because obviously like his heart was like, went out for Ishmael. Like he didn't want to see his son in those circumstances and everything. And so for him to obey God meant that he had to trust that God was going to take care of him.
Yeah. And I love that whole verse 14. So Abraham rose early in the morning. Like once again, his obedience is immediate. He didn't like it. He was displeased, but he still got up early in the morning and did what the Lord said.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that, it's definitely a hard moment for Hagar to have to leave. And how she wanted it to happen probably wasn't in this manner, but she did get what she wanted. Because I'd imagine being a slave woman, your goal is to be free. And even though she was in the desert, the Lord was still with her. And I think it's notable that whenever she's crying, the Lord responds to her and says that I have heard the boys cry.
Yeah.
And I think that the boy was a bow shot away weeping for his mom. And the Lord wasn't just protecting the boy, he was protecting the nation, because he knew what was going to come from Ishmael, and he knew that it had purpose in helping Israel. And so I think that sometimes, like, when we're in the desert in life, we think that the Lord is not there, but it's like the Lord hears us even when we're in those dry places.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's good. Yeah. I think I've always been struck by Abraham's love for Ishmael. I think there was, and I think we talked about this a little bit last week, but like there was always the possibility that he could have looked at Ishmael and just said, well, you're not the promise. So like, now that I know Isaac is coming, or now that I know Isaac is here at this point, like that, I don't need you. But he really loved Ishmael. And I think we see that later too. Ishmael loved Abraham. Yeah. And we come to find out later when he passes. But like, I think I was really struck by just his genuine love for his son, regardless of the circumstances, how it came about. And I think there's this, this whole story altogether with Ishmael, I think is encouraging. We obviously, we want to live righteous and we want to be holy. We want to do what God calls us to do. But there is something beautiful in God really like doing something amazing out of our mess, like in our messiness and like our sin. And like, I think about how many people, I can't speak for y'all, I wasn't conceived in wedlock, right? Like, in my own life, but like, to know that like I'm not a mistake, quote unquote, right? Like Ishmael wasn't a mistake, or as much as it was, sin, he shouldn't have done it, that God still blessed it and figured out something to do. And so I think, it's one of those things that's encouraging, that regardless of where we've gotten to this point and what's happened to us to this point, that like God can use it and he can bless it and he can do something, incredible with it. And I think that's just the beauty of Ishmael's story to me. Like, he didn't ask for it. Hagar didn't ask for it. Like, nobody asked for kind of what took place for them. Yeah. But God was still able to do something amazing through him regardless. Yeah. So obviously he's sent off when, you guys have read this. So there's no need to get every detail here. But then Abraham makes a covenant with Abimelech, which is another interesting one. We see covenant coming back up here again. Anything that just was interesting to you guys in this particular section here, this conversation with Abimelech, this oath that they swear by, this covenant that they sign?
I think it's interesting that like he didn't consult the Lord. Or at least it doesn't say he consulted the Lord. Like, or should I make a covenant with this ruler? Like, I think it's just interesting that he made it. Like, okay, yeah, let's do it. Because as we know, like later on in history, like covenants were made and they were just not supposed to have been made. So I think it's just interesting that he didn't consult the Lord.
Yeah.
Mm.
And I think like he needed to go through that moment earlier in chapter 20 when he thinks that there's no fear of the Lord with Abimelech to have this covenant in chapter 21. Because if he would have thought that God wasn't with Abimelech, then it would have been a contract between two people. But it's like now that he knows that the Lord is in this place with Abimelech and with him,
Yeah.
then it becomes a covenant.
That's good.
Yeah. That is really good.
Yeah.
I actually appreciated the evolution of him and Abimelech's relationship because I don't know. I think Abimelech had every right to like just really be upset with Abraham or just like treat him differently or just be like, all right, like, you know, like just really act a way towards him. But yet you do see on the other hand, the blessing that Abraham, you know, spoke over them and his family. And like even this moment with them really partnering together. I thought that was really cool to see. And then knowing that this set the tone of what type of relationship they had. And later on, we'll see Isaac, you know, having an encounter with Abimelech. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was interesting, just his keen awareness to the favor on Abraham, right? Abimelech's keen awareness, right? That's what he comes to him with is God is with you in everything you do. This is verse 22 for me, right? And that like his motivation was like, man, I want what you got. Like you seem to have something different about you in the way God is with you. This different favor on you. And I'm not trying to get in the way of that. Like if God is on your side, like I'm trying to be on that side too. Like I'm not trying to be against that. Like I can see it and I'm aware. And so I just love that he just wants to be in proximity with Abraham and on his, you know, in covenant and in truce with him to not be, you know, again, against him and have his hand against him. And so, I don't know. I just love that humility, that awareness, just that discernment to just see that in Abraham and make the wise choice there to say, look, I'm trying to be with you on your side. And I'm not trying to be against you.
Yeah. And a lot of times these are the moments that allow for someone who could be a non-believer to become a believer because of their relationship with someone who is close to God. So, yeah.
Anything else you guys had here? 21. All hearts and minds clear?
Yeah.
Good. Awesome. Well, look, appreciate you guys joining us. See you guys tomorrow.
Thank you for joining us for the VIBEZ Daily Podcast. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform or download our favorite, the VIBEZ Church app. Visit vibes.church/devoted for additional episodes, notes, details, and the latest merch. Join us